down. Keep your tin foil. Nope. I mean, they
We're still missing Veronica. Where's she at? I'm gonna sneak behind you because Jeff's gonna come over here. Okay. No. Okay, we're ready. We're going to call the meeting for Akron City Council special meeting to order. We're going to ask that the clerk will read the roll.
Okay. Roll call. Freeman. He's absent today, just for the record. Fusco, Hoke, Kamer, Keith, Kilby, Milkovich, Neal, Amobian, Samples, Sims, Somerville, Swirsky.
At this time, can we please have a motion to go into council as a whole?
I'd like to make a motion.
Is there a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. At this time, we're also going to ask if we can have a motion to have Councilman Fusco, Chair of the Planning Committee, chair the meeting.
I'll make a motion to have Jeff Fusco be the committee chair.
Is there a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Okay. Through.
Thank you. This will be the public hearing today. We have two public hearings, and the procedure is we ask that everyone who wishes to testify before council is sworn in by a representative from our law department before the public hearings. Therefore, I'd like to ask Mr. Angeloni, to please swear in, if there's anyone here wishing to testify this afternoon, to please stand and be sworn in.
If you would, please raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. We have two items that are going to be up for a public hearing this afternoon. The first item is authorizing a conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 550 East Wilbeth Road. That's the first item that's up for public hearing. What we'll do is we will receive a report from our planning staff, after which we'll ask for those who wish to speak in favor or against, and then we will open it up for council. So at this point, I'd like to ask Mr. Antonucci to please provide for the committee comments reference authorizing conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 550 East Wilbeth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, council members. My comments on this matter are based upon the information provided by the applicant and the additional investigation conducted by the City of Akron, planning staff, and the city's outside consultant on telecommunications facilities, the Center for Municipal Solutions. EcoSite LLC is a lessee of a 40-foot by 60-foot, 2,400 square foot property owned by Slovak Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in a block bounded by East Wilbeth to the north, Palmetto Avenue to the south, Coventry Street to the east, and Sunset Avenue to the west. The property contains a church and paved parking area and is addressed as 550 East Wilbeth Road. Surrounding uses are all residential, except for I-77 to the east. The property is zoned single-family residential use district, U1H1A1, in accordance with the Land Use and Development Guide Plan. Petitioner is proposing to construct a monopole telecommunications tower, which requires conditional use approval. The 75 feet in height tower will be within the lease area, which is sited within the southeastern quadrant of the 2.27 acre property. The lease area would be located 45 feet north of the Palmetto Avenue right-of-way and 25 feet west of the Coventry Street right-of-way. A total of 12 panel antennas would be installed. A 15-foot wide access utility easement would extend westward from the lease area to an existing curb cut along Palmetto Avenue. The supporting electronic equipment, most of which will be enclosed within a small support cabinet, would be located atop an elevated 8 feet by 8 feet equipment platform placed east of the base of the tower. A 50 feet by 40 feet compound area within the lease area would be enclosed with the compound wooden fence topped with barbed wire. Signage placed on the wooden fence would consist of 4 no trespassing signs, each measuring 12 inches by 18 inches. In addition, there would be 3 similar-sized warning signs, plus an 18-inch by 24-inch contact information sign. The site would be unmanned except for routine visits from a technician. In order to obtain conditional use approval, the petitioner must present sufficient evidence to satisfy the general standards applicable to all conditional uses in Section 153.474 of the codified ordinances and the special standards applicable to communication towers and facilities set forth in Section 153.476C. Under Section 153.476C9, the city may hire any consultant and/or expert the city deems necessary to assist the city in reviewing and evaluating the petition for conditional use for any proposed communication tower or facility. For this petition, the city asked its independent consultant, the Center for Municipal Solutions, to review the petitioner's proposal and conduct an investigation of the relevant facts and circumstances relating to the proposal. Here, based upon the results of the CMS investigation and the additional investigation conducted by the city's planning staff, the planning staff believes that the construction of a 75-foot tower at this specific location does not satisfy the general conditional use standard set forth in Section 153474, which requires evidence that the use, A, will be harmonious with and in accordance with the general objectives of the city's comprehensive plan, and B, will be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so as to be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing and intended character of the general vicinity and will not change the essential character of the same area. Moreover, it is the planning staff's opinion that the proposal does not satisfy the specific conditional use criteria for communication towers and facilities set forth in Section 153-476C1 and 7. One goal of the Land Use and Development Guide Plan is to preserve and protect single-family neighborhoods. The proposed tower location abuts residential uses to the north, south, and west. While not abutting the tower will be visible to the residences abutting I-77 to the east. The petitioner's site plan was reviewed at the August 6, 2019 meeting of the Urban Design and Historic Preservation Commission, UDHPC. The UDHPC recommended that the petitioner submit detailed landscaping and fencing plans in addition to tower simulation photos. The planning staff is of the opinion that a 75 feet in height telecommunications tower would be out of character in this neighborhood, nor is it an appropriate land use. In this regard, Section 153.476C7 specifically provides that towers should be prohibited in residentially zoned areas unless carriers can demonstrate that the prohibition is a barrier of entry in a particular case. With respect to this factor, the CMS report specifically finds that a denial of this proposal would not be a barrier to entry. Although the petitioner stated that the tower located at 550 East Wilbeth Road will be the best solution that will allow them to achieve their company standard, CMS reports that with small cell facilities and distributed antenna systems, or DAS, networks available to the applicant, denial of the proposed tower is not a barrier of entry. CMS noted that the petitioner did not forward any detailed information or explanation as to why small cell facilities or DAS network technology is not being proposed or considered. Small cell facilities or DAS network technology is the same technology as macro site technology. It is merely a different way of distributing the signal. The CMS report further finds that the petitioner has not proven that co-location will not provide adequate relief. While the petitioner cited locations in or near the proposed tower that they contend will not solve their stated capacity issue, they have not proven that these structures would not provide the proposed needed relief. CMS requested input modeling information by sector used to create the propagation maps. The response did not address the question. Moreover, CMS has identified a number of alternative locations, including the Verizon Tower, Glover, CLC, Firestone Park Methodist Church, or the Bridgestone building that could provide co-location on an existing structure. Thus, the CMS report also found that the proposal did not satisfy the specific conditional use criteria set forth in Section 153.476C1, which states each request should be designed to provide space for a minimum of 3 carriers, unless the carrier demonstrates that space for additional carriers is impractical. Co-location will eliminate the need for additional towers in the same area. Also, the carrier must demonstrate that a new tower is necessary and co-location on an existing tower is not feasible. With respect to the height of the tower, the report stresses that the applicant has not proven that the proposed antenna height of 75 feet is the minimum height necessary to provide reliable relief. Lastly, CMS contends that the petitioner is not in compliance with Section 153.468, petition for conditional use. Specifically, Section 153.468G requires a narrative statement evaluating the economic effects on the surrounding neighborhood. As such, the petitioner has not submitted quantifiable economic impact data of a new tower installation in a comparable neighborhood. Planning staff finds the requested conditional use is not consistent with the general conditional use standards found in Section 153.474A through H and the specific standards found in Section 153.476C, and therefore recommends disapproval of the petition of EcoSite LLC for a conditional use to construct a telecommunication tower at 550 East Wilbeth Road. Planning Commission recommends approval.
Thank you, Mr. Antonucci. At this time, I'd like to ask the clerk to read in the legal notice.
Some legal notice for the record. Notice is hereby given that the following public hearing will be held by the Council of the City of Akron on Monday, September 23rd, 2019, during a special meeting, council meeting at 4 o'clock in Akron City Council Chambers, 166 South High Street, on an ordinance authorizing a conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 550 East Waterloo Road.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. At this time, we'll open up the public hearing and ask if there's anyone here wishing to testify before council who is in support of the proposed cell tower at 550 East Wilbeth. And please provide for us your name and address. Is that on?
Excuse me, sir. Hit that little red button on the top. There you go. Now try it.
All right. Thank you.
I'll start again.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for allowing me to be in front of you this afternoon. My name is Don Graves, or Doné Graves, as my card might say. I'm an attorney with Buckley King in downtown Cleveland at 600 Superior Avenue, 14th floor. Also with me is Mr. Robert McAvoy, my colleague at the law firm, who was strong enough to carry all these binders up here this afternoon. Also in attendance with us, in the event that there's some questions, would be our engineers from T-Mobile. That's Mike Gerdes and Prakash Balakrishnan. I think it's close enough, right? I apologize for that. Also in attendance is Kit Nickel, who is the regional site acquisition person or site development manager for T-Mobile. And also present is Mr. Mike Dobbenmeyer from Fortune Wireless. So this is a collaborative effort. It's a eco-site tower that's building the tower for and on behalf of T-Mobile, and if there's any subsequent carriers who would like to be on that tower, should that come to pass, they would be glad to accommodate other carriers. Also in attendance is, as I said, Mr. Mike Dobbenmeyer, who's with Fortune Wireless, who's the site acquisition firm that helped identify or helps EcoSite in its location and identification of potential sites. I want to take a few moments just to say I've been representing carriers, cell tower companies, and municipalities with respect to placement of telecommunication sites since 1996. Almost as long and as old as somebody else in this room that I won't mention right now. We've handled these kinds of cases throughout the state of Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and in Kentucky. It's a troublesome process because it's difficult to place these telecommunications towers around the country. When I first started, my first question to a local community was, how many of you know somebody who happens to have a cell phone in their pocket? And I might get half of the audience who might have somebody that they knew or who had a relative. Well, now, I would dare say there's not one person in this room who doesn't use a telecommunication facility or equipment, whether it's a cell phone or an iPad, or even for the laptop, using the wireless connectivity that we're proposing. The reality is, the difference is it's no longer telecommunication of voice. The vast bulk of the transmittal is data, whether it's pictures or texts or something else. It's not the voice communication, so it's changed dramatically when I first started doing this and when you perhaps first became acquainted with telecommunication towers. I'd like to point out today that this application process for this site and the next site has been particularly arduous. And our application includes all of the materials that have been submitted through the city or through its consultant, Mr. Comey, and Center for Municipal Solutions over the past several years. I put on your desks a large volume. It actually contains the materials for both applications, both for the 550 East Wilbeth and also for the South Hawkins location. Rather than trying to exchange all of the material and all the information that's within the exchanges that were provided to Mr. Comey, we thought we'd provide a sample under Exhibit A. And in Exhibit A, you'll see an example of the exchange of communications between the companies, and you'll see multicolors. There'd be an original in black, and then there'd be a follow-up in another color, and then there'd be a follow-up in another color. Again, I don't expect you to read it all, but I wanted to give you a sense of how the parties have tried to engage in a dialogue to find a solution. EcoSite and T-Mobile don't come to this site lightly, just cavalierly saying that we need to have this particular site in this location. This is an absolute requirement for the productivity of our system. On your desk, you'll see, some of you will see a red binder, a red pamphlet. We didn't produce enough for everybody so you could share, but its purpose is intended to help the city appreciate why this infrastructure that we're trying to build out is so critical for your city. Just like your mayor wants to build and have your city become a city of the future, this is what's going to be required. The reality is we can't build out our adequate system, we being EcoSite and T-Mobile, without having these two locations. I want to point out to you that there's really only two conditions necessary for us to get a conditional permit to prove to you that one is required. One is that a tower or an antenna is necessary for us to provide the kind of service that's mandated by our federal license under the Telecommunication Act of 1996. Secondly, we have to show that there are no other existing towers that will meet our need. You heard the representative, Mr. Antonucci from your planning department, who expressed an opinion about all these other potential sites that are out there. Believe me, our carriers don't look to build new tall structures. There's no advantage to that. Just because there happens to be another tall structure half a mile down the road or a mile down the road, that does not meet the requirements necessary for this application and this applicant. It's different. It's not like when I was coming up, if I wanted to listen to a baseball game in the summertime, I could tune into 1100 and be here on the eastern part of the country and probably pick it up. I know I used to listen to it after 9 o'clock in Washington, D.C. I could pick up this channel. That's the way that radio telecommunications work. This telecommunication system doesn't work that same way. There's a very short distance between the antenna and the handheld set. And I'll just make as an example. The signal goes from here to an antenna, and from an antenna it gets transmitted either digitally, either through a landline or through a microwave attachment. It doesn't go from my phone 200 miles away to somebody else's phone. So it's critical that it goes from this phone a short distance of a few miles to the nearest antenna. And from that antenna, like I said, it goes to a microwave tower or to a landline, which then transmitted to wherever its ultimate destination is. If it's to another cell tower, it then gets transmitted from that cell tower to the phone that it's trying to reach. It's just a different technology than we're accustomed to. I respectfully suggest to you that we meet the Akron telecommunication tower code for placement of cell towers when taken in conjunction with the Telecommunication Act and the FCC regulations on placement of these towers. The federal government recognized that these are not the most attractive installations in communities. They just aren't. They're tall poles that happen to have, they happen to have an array on their rooftop, on their tops. The industry as a whole, when I started working on this back in the 90s, began to recognize that there would be a lot of pushback about placement of telecommunication towers in communities, particularly in the residential communities. Unfortunately, you just can't do that, because in order to provide the infrastructure to help the network accomplish its objective, it has to be placed in such a fashion that it can reach my phone and still get distributed into the system. As I said, this site is necessary, as we've demonstrated to Mr. Comey through his extensive studies, and there is no co-location. In fact, the Akron Code specifically says other communication towers. It doesn't say a tall building somewhere. It doesn't say a rooftop. It says towers. So, notwithstanding all of that, our analysts looked at this particular project and found that there were no existing tall structures, whether it's a building or a tower, that would meet the need for the community, for the company, to meet its needs to provide service to the customers. Both of these are capacity needs sites, which means not only, yes, there may be coverage in a particular location, but these are capacity needs, because what happens is when you get more and more people using them, there's a need for a greater capacity. It's like having a sewer line that comes to your house that's a 2-inch sewer line versus a sewer line that has a 4-foot sewer line. The more houses you have, the more phones that you have, the more capacity there is for a system that can accommodate the load. So, like I said, under Section 8, you'll see the exchange of correspondence between Mr. Comey. This process was a 2-year-long process. My client has been assessed over $10,000 in fees to process the singular application. That's not been done elsewhere in the city of Akron for a telecommunications site, to charge $10,000. At the end, we provided our final response. We provided our general objections as to why we couldn't go to any other location despite the hours and days spent having our experts review it. We couldn't go anywhere. Then you heard a comment about small cell technology would be a viable alternative. That is not the case, and that is not the law in the United States of America. If you turn to Section B, you'll see our attempts to help you show the city the options for the type of landscaping that we would provide around the site, both either the wooden fence and or the arbor vitae, which is found. This is just a sample. If you look at the second page under B. And you'll see a statement from Mr. Samko, our regional manager, who makes representations that they'll meet with the city with whatever the landscaping requirements would be. It's a very common request. Sometimes it's more appropriate for there to be arbor vitae, sometimes it's more industrial. It's fine with our clients, whichever you would prefer to have. They also have indicated in this sworn statement, and as they have designed, this particular site is designed to carry up to 3 carriers. That would be the current proposed carrier and 2 other carriers, because that means that the pole is sturdy enough to accommodate other carriers. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be desirable, because the more you drive down the telecommunication antenna, the less likely you're going to be able to find other carriers who can use that, because like with most antennas, it has to do with elevation, height, and they aren't going to be able to necessarily accommodate at a lower elevation, just the nature of the business. If you go to tab C in our book, there was again a discussion about the economic impact on the community. You'll see the study by Valbridge, which was produced in 2018, that there is little to no economic impact on a community when you place a tower. In fact, our experience has been that when you have poor telecommunication coverage in a neighborhood, that that the citizens object and don't want to move there, and the businesses don't want to be there because their telecommunication systems don't work. That's why this has become so critical. And when a carrier has a telecommunication system that doesn't work, they end up being not competitive in the marketplace. Then I ask you to go to D. D is an attempt at a photo simulation of the site. If you look at the drawing, you'll see that they took pictures from various locations in the area, and they tried to superimpose what the antenna would look like. And sometimes you can see it you'll see the alternatives with and without the tower. So the images should be in tandem. Again, they show the existing site without the tower and with the proposed tower at the estimated height for where the tower is going to be. Then if you go to E, section, and you can study those as you wish. If you go to tab E, there was a discussion in the Planning Commission meeting about changing the color of the tower. The city code requires gray. It doesn't matter to the carriers, but the reality is, in all our years of doing this, it's almost universally gray. Some people make a joke because it's Northern Ohio and that's the least intrusive color. Gray is the color. It also is because that's the color of the galvanized metal. Because the minute you start applying coatings to it, those are subject to peeling and creating more problems for maintenance. So by having the galvanized steel tower, as you see in the image here, that eliminates the need for continual maintenance and the potential for having an unsightly location. Then I turn your attention to F, the tab of F. Not only was the Telecommunications Act passed and amended, in 2018, the Federal Communications Commission undertook to help communities understand what their authority would be under the Act. It's a very difficult proposition to balance the interests of the local community versus the need to provide a wireless network across the country. Everything is interrelated in this network. Doesn't do you any good to have a phone that works here that doesn't work down the road. So I ask you to look particularly at this summary of the what we believe to be the violations of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. In it, in Section 1, you see the overview of the Act and the applicable provisions. There's Section 253, which speaks about removal of barriers to entry, and Section B, which is 332C, is the regulatory treatment of mobile services. Don't get these terms confused. There is some language in your code that speaks to barrier to entry. That is not the barrier to entry that's referenced under the Telecommunications Act and the law that governs the entire nation. If you look at this, if you look at the section, Section 253 has been interpreted by many courts to represent a broad preemption of laws that inhibit competition. It preempts local laws and your local zoning rules. In essence, you can't enact legislation that has the effect of prohibiting the ability of any entity to provide interstate telecommunication services. The local communities, if you look under Section B, the second bullet point, the local jurisdictions do not have the authority to require that providers offer certain types or levels of service or to dictate the design of a provider's network. Akron, unfortunately, cannot dictate under the federal law how our network is to be designed, period. The notion, I'll get back to that. More importantly, this requirement of small cell technology, which are smaller antennas but a lot more placed around the community, has never been required under your code until Mr. Comey raised it in our discussions. It's not a part of your law. And you can't require that of us until it's been part of your law about placement of telecommunication providers, period. To require us now to provide small cell technology after we already tell you that it won't work for our system at this particular location is an improper act under the law. If you go to the Roman numeral section number 2, violations, I again say to you that we're not required to consider alternative technology. We're just not. All we have to do is show that a new tower is necessary and that co-location on an existing tower is not feasible. We already know Mr. Comey has acknowledged that a new tower is required because he spent the last months trying to tell us where we should go to meet our needs. So we shouldn't even be having a dialogue about a new tower being necessary. Once he has acknowledged that we should go to alternative locations, that should end the discussion about whether or not a tower is necessary, because we've demonstrated to him, or he should acknowledge that we have a need for a tower in this location. The only other thing is that co-location on an existing tower is not feasible. There are no existing towers that are feasible for this. Now, again, even if it was an existing tall structure, there's none of that will work for our network and our system based upon our engineering models. That sort of demand constitutes a barrier to entry under the federal law. Notwithstanding what your language reads in the municipal code, this kind of conduct is a barrier to entry for this particular carrier. It's denying us to have the ability to provide the kind of technology that's necessary to provide good and adequate service for the citizens of Akron. Also, under B, Akron has attempted to control or dictate the design, speed, and capacity of our network. Under Section 332C3A of the Act, as interpreted by the FCC, which is controlling, by the way, and courts give deference to the FCC ruling, local jurisdictions do not have the authority to require that providers offer certain types or levels of service or to dictate the design of a provider's network. Mr. Comey did a fine job doing his analysis of what he believed was appropriate in his mind about what we need. We've testified, we've provided affidavits that are part of the record from our engineers that we need to have this particular site at this location, and this is our reason. Again, I point out that we have been assessed unreasonably discriminatory costs to pay for Mr. Comey to self-serve and study. Every study he made meant that he would earn more fees. I trust the honor and integrity of Mr. Comey. I don't mean to besmirch him. But if you understand, if you go to a mechanic and you ask a mechanic, help me figure out what I need to do in my car, and he knows he's going to get paid every time that he comes up with another problem or an obstacle in the way, it creates an unreasonable barrier for my clients to be able to...
Can we stick to, I apologize, Mr. Grace, if we can just stick to the issue at hand.
That is the issue at hand, unfortunately, because part of the problem is I have to be able to put into the record, Mr. Chairman, that the fees that have been charged by the city of Akron are discriminatory. And I'm finished with that part of it. The kind of requirement for small cell technology has not been required of other carriers in these kinds of application, and it's a violation to require a certain style of service that has not been required of, under your law, a functionally equivalent provider of functionally equivalent services. In order for you to establish the aesthetic requirements that are being imposed, you have to incorporate clear and ascertainable standards applied in a principled manner and published in advance. That's what must be done, and that's what was not done here in the city of Akron. During this, between this appearance and the prior appearance, we had reached out to members of council, and I was appropriately reprimanded by the law department that I shouldn't be trying to contact council members just under the canons of ethics. And I respect that, and I appreciate that, and I apologize to the law department who raised the question before me. In all my years before, I've always gone before the city council members and tried to talk to them, to hear what their concerns are, to see what I can do to find out. I wasn't able to do that here. I did get an inquiry from Mr. Funk about some alternate sites. We undertook to even look at those alternative sites, spent time and energy for our engineers to look at them, and you'll see in there our letter responding to whether or not we could consider the sites for both the Wilbert site and for the Hawkins site. Pardon me. Respectfully, I say to you that the demands that are being made through the auspices of the planning department and Mr. Comey are unadvisedly expensive, beyond what's expected of other carriers in the community. They're against the law, they're improper, and we respectfully ask that the city council undertake its job to help make sure that the community is provided with the adequate telecommunication services from all the carriers to provide a competitive marketplace. And I have nothing further unless there's some questions that we have from Mr. Gerdes or Bacrosh or any of our other team members. They're here to reaffirm everything that we provided to Mr. Comey in the past in case there's a question. But I don't want to burden this meeting with further discussion about why the engineers feel it's absolutely required that we have to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. I would also ask at this time, is there anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of this, the proposed cell tower at 550 East Wilbeth? Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor? Anyone in favor? Anyone else? Okay, very good. Mr. Funk? Yes.
On behalf of the law department, at this time, I think it might be appropriate to allow Richard Comey to, city consultant, to address this.
Okay, sure. Recognize Mr. Comey.
Mr. Chairman, council members, members of the audience, my name is Richard Comey. I'm the owner of the Center for Municipal Solutions, which is the largest municipal wireless consulting firm in the country. We work for municipalities. We do not work for the carriers or the tower companies. As far as my background, I have a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. I have an MBA in business, and I have been consulting on wireless issues for municipalities since 1997, and have been in front of literally a few thousand boards and reviewed applications in 39 states in this country. Let me talk a little bit about this particular application and how we've reviewed it. First of all, let me explain, and I'm not going to go into the cost issue, but the industry changed consultants midstream. They started out with one of the gentlemen they have here, provided information, we responded to him, and then they decided that they wanted to turn it over to Mr. Graves. That's fine, but that added to some of the disarray relevant to the application. What we're talking about here is a tower, a steel pole with antennas on it in a residentially zoned district. I'd like to clarify one thing that was said by Mr. Graves. I never said that they needed a new tower. What I said was, I agree that they need a site somewhere in the area. It's a big difference between needing a tower and a site. This application that has come in front of you is being pushed, and as Mr. Graves said, he's here representing EcoSite in conjunction with the carrier T-Mobile. EcoSite is a tower company. Lest it be understood that if they can go somewhere else and co-locate on a rooftop or another tower or a building, EcoSite is out in the cold. They no longer have any issue here, nor do EcoSite as a tower company have any standing under federal regulations.
Excuse me, sir, pull that microphone a little closer to you for the record.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. That's okay.
I know I'm a loudspeaker, so I don't normally use them, and I apologize, folks. If you can't hear me, I'll do it much better this way. So that it has to be understood that the carrier is what needs the service. And yes, I will agree with Mr. Graves in a lot of areas that cell phone coverage has gone from voice to data. By the way, the industry all over the country now, when they put in sites, are not putting in the analog type of information for voice. They're putting in the broadband categories, bandwidth as it's called, that is for data usage predominantly. So they're looking for capacity relief. What's capacity? He mentioned it 2 or 3 times, and I'm not doubting, please, anyone's intelligence. I'm simply doubting the fact that you don't deal with wireless on a regular basis. Capacity is when they don't have enough facilities to handle the calls or the data at the level that they feel is necessary for service. One of the issues that we had with the back and forth between us and the industry was they gave us some standards in terms of their data capacity and said so many customers per 5 megahertz of bandwidth. And they also had some other standards. And we went back to them and said, those are nice, but where did you get them? They said, well, they're T-Mobile standards. And I said, that's just fine. Send me the T-Mobile documentation that shows me that that's the standard that this should be judged under. Never got that information, folks. Okay? In terms of the issue of whether or not there is a barrier to entry here, Let me first say that the regulation that Mr. Graves was quoting from September of last fall is an FCC report and order. It is not a telecommunications law. Secondly, and I'll just ask the question because I don't know, something that came into effect 2 years after this application was started, should that be considered as part of this application process? Is it grandfathered? If somebody wants to get a new room on their house, and at the present time, the front yard setback's 25 feet, and they go and stay within the 25 feet, and the law changes so it's got to be 30 feet before they got their permit, are they required under the 25 or under the 30? So I'm not even sure that a number of these things like barrier to entry, because the discussion of barrier to entry was never mentioned prior to this report and order in the fall of last year. It was known as a significant gap in coverage. And the barrier was whether or not the community was zoning them out, which they can't do. Now, with all of that aside, let's talk about barrier to entry. It was discussed, and they showed us data on a Verizon tower, on a Methodist church, a St. John's Lutheran church, and on their facility and site. And
Let me get you one.
Can you put it over here so I can speak? And if that's, as long as everybody can see. Whoops. Yeah, turn this slightly if you would. There we go. All right. Let me visually show you what we're talking about here, folks. 77, this is East Wilbeth. This is the proposed site for the tower that EchoSite and T-Mobile are proposing. There is a Verizon existing tower already up here. There is a Garfield Community Learning Center. Here's the Methodist Church. Here's the Bridgestone facilities. By the way, on the Bridgestone facilities, they didn't give us any data. They just kind of shuffled that site off to the side. And there's the Glover Community Center. What are they looking for data capacity relief? Right up here where my hand is, they have a site. Cellular sites
I think you're referring to the northwest corner of the map.
Cellular sites are generally 3 sectors, folks, 120 degrees each. The sector, which is the beta sector, you got one that goes this way, one that goes that way, and one that goes this way. This sector is where they need capacity relief.
And you're referring to the northwest corner of the map?
Right. It's just beyond the corner of the map, up in here. There's their site. Seems to me this are all closer to where they need their capacity relief. Just basic and simple, okay? Now granted, some of these facilities, they did this at a certain height. They did that at 37 feet. They did this one at 50 feet because what they wanted to do was say, we're not going to build a tower at either one of these. This particular one, because they also wanted the Verizon tower location, they also want to do some coverage along 77. And obviously that Verizon tower location will cover 77. But one of the things that hasn't been brought up to you yet is, when there is a tower out there today, the FCC rules state that any wireless carrier can come in to a community and add 10% or 20 feet to the height of a tower, and it has to be approved. Federal law has to be approved. They did this at 90 feet. If they added another, that's the Verizon tower, if they added another 20 feet and provided that information, it would increase the coverage going this way. It certainly is going to cover Route 77 better than what's down here at one end of 77. So there's a number of sites. The Bridgestone site, they didn't give us any data at all. On that site, they just completely left it aside. This building here has a penthouse. The northernmost building has a penthouse on the roof. You could put a penthouse on top of it, stealth it so it looks exactly the same as the facility, and no one would know it was there. They should have at least given us information on that particular location, folks. That's the general idea of what you're looking at, and we felt and believe that these other locations will provide service to what they need. What they say in their application is that their site is the best. The best. There's nothing that says they have to have the best. They need to have reliable service. When we asked them how much service they needed, we didn't get that question answered either. So how do I know that the percentage they showed here, which they said was the best at their proposed site, is what they really require? So from this standpoint, there are a number of alternatives, locations, that make the issue of a prohibition of service not a reality. Let me squeeze back here if you don't mind. I'm getting close. I don't want to take forever. Let me do one other thing, folks. Mr. Graves talked a little bit about what he called small cells. There are two types of small cells. There's a small cell that's below the tree lines that handles service all by itself, and it can do transmit and receive and translations and so on. There's another kind of small cell known as a distributed antenna system. What is that? It's an antenna on top of essentially a telephone pole. You use existing telephone poles in most cases. That could be stealthed. It's below the tree level. It has equipment on it. Yes, it will not go as far as a macro site, but they come and are utilized all over the country, very predominantly in residential areas, because putting towers in residential areas is a problem, okay? Now, it's kind of interesting. Back on February 6th of this year, we had a conference call. And I asked at that conference call why the application had not considered DAS or a small cell solution. By the way, it is not alternate technology. It is just what it says. It's a distributed antenna system. It's just a different way to distribute the same signal, the same service. I asked why. One of the gentlemen that's here today, Mr. Geddes, stated, that's a good question. Another gentleman that I don't believe is here today with T-Mobile said at the time of the design of when they were working on this proposal for Akron, that the design of the Cleveland market area was not using DAS or small cell, and therefore they stated, we didn't consider it. Now later on, when we asked about it again, in one of their later responses, they did come back and say, it's only used for very small areas, it's used for in buildings, etc. I can tell you factually, because it's one of our clients, the town of Hempstead on Long Island, largest town in the country, 800,000 people, has 154 DAS nodes thus far, and they're getting more. By the way, T-Mobile's on every single one of them. They're all in residential areas, folks, and they cover capacity for those residential areas. Let me close by saying, as far as I'm concerned, that no good faith effort has been shown that one or more of the alternate sites, particularly the Verizon site or distributed antenna systems, could not be used and would be much less obtrusive than a new tower as has been proposed by the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Comey. Mr. Funk?
Quick follow-up questions. Could you just explain, there was an allegation made that your fees are unreasonable. Could you just respond to that? Did you put any expertise into this?
We have a contract with the city of Akron to review wireless applications. This application, had we gotten the information we requested in the first or second or third time around, would have kept the fees dramatically lower than what they are, because every time it came in, and finally after 4 times the industry said, that's it, we're not going to give you anything more, and they put that in writing, and that's why we're here. They refused to provide any additional information.
And then in terms of the accusation is that you're trying to dictate the technology or the type of level of service. Can you just explain your response to that? What your role is?
Well, first of all, as I said, I'm not trying to dictate what type of service or standard or anything else. When it came to the information they provided us on what they said they needed for capacity, we didn't disagree, we just said, where did this come from? Show us the demonstration of that you really need to prove that that's what your service is. When we got into the question of the distributed antenna systems, that's not an alternate technology. That's just a lesser intrusive way to cover service in the area by having things below the tree level, which are much less obtrusive than a tower in that area. Anything else, Steve? Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. We'll ask again, anyone in favor? We'll ask anyone against. I'm sorry, if you can speak into the microphone, please.
I was hoping to have the opportunity to rebut the testimony of Mr. Comey.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, a couple of things. As I pointed out in my statements before, the FCC ruling is not new law. The FCC ruling was brought forward in 2018 because there was so much confusion by the greater telecommunication industry as to interpretation of the law. The FCC ruling is an interpretation of the existing Telecommunication Act. It is not, as Mr. Comey has indicated, that it's some new regulation. It's always been there. It's just that some people were interpreting it incorrectly. As we can see here, it created some problem because there's an attempt to obfuscate the law. Secondly, Mr. Comey has, as fine a man as he may be, he again has demonstrated he continually has tried to redesign the network. Our answers were we're not providing any alternatives because this is what we have designed based upon what our needs on a national network. He kept asking what our design requirements were, and we said we can't provide that because that's a trade secret. We're just saying to you that based upon on a sworn affidavit from Mr. Gordes, which is part of our record, that this is what we need to have for our coverage. Just because you have another open space down the street doesn't mean that it works, as evidenced by the effort and us trying to work with Mr. Funk to look at alternative locations. They don't work for the network, period. If we got into the kind of negotiations that we had to get into with Mr. Comey around the country, there would not be the ability to build out a network, plain and simple. The reason there's always pushback because we try to give as much information as we could under the law and under our business guidelines. We gave everything that's required of T-Mobile and EcoSite under the law. Respectfully, we submit this to you. We say to you that the fees are deemed to be excessive, not because they're excessive, but because they're have not been required of other similar carriers in this community. The small cell technology, or whatever the two technologies were that Mr. Comey, spoke to, were requirements that are a different type of technology, different antennas. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Yes, it's the same radio broadcast, but it's a different type of equipment that we were not using, and it came up because it was not required in your code prior to this submission of this application. In fact, it's still not a requirement of your code. Perhaps down the road you might want to consider requiring small cell technology to be looked at, but it's never been imposed upon any other carrier in this city. That's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone? Very good. Is there anyone here wishing to speak against the proposal at 550 East Wilbeth? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone? Very good. I'll close the public hearing at this point. Open it up to if there's any committee members here, council members that have any questions or comments. Very good. Hearing none, we will now move on to the next item, and I will ask the clerk at this time to provide for us the legal notice for South Hawkins.
Okay, legal notice is hereby given to, that the following the public hearing will be held at the council, by the council of the City of Akron on Monday, September 23rd, during a special council meeting at 4 p.m. in Akron City Council Chambers, 166 South High Street, upon an ordinance authorizing a conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 1554 South Hawkins Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Mr. Antonucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My comments on this matter are based upon the information provided by the applicant and the additional investigation conducted by the City of Akron planning staff and the city's outside consultant on telecommunication facilities, the Center for Municipal Solutions. EcoSite LLC is a lessee of a 75 feet by 75 feet or 5,625 square foot property owned by Larry Bowers, doing business as First Place Rentals. The property is located on the west side of South Hawkins Avenue, south of Diagonal Road, and contains a retail building and parking area and is addressed as 1554 South Hawkins Avenue. Surrounding uses are Accurate Investigative Services, Carriage House Drive-Through, and First American Loans to the north, Brightside Daycare to the south, Hawkins Plaza to the east, and Somerville Funeral Home to the west. The property is zoned Retail Business Use District, U3 H1A1, in accordance with the Land Use and Development Guide Plan. The petitioner is proposing to construct a monopole telecommunications tower which requires conditional use approval. The 100 feet in height tower, which can be extended to 120 feet in height, will be within the lease area that is sited to the rear of the 36,100 square feet property. A total of 12 panel antennas would be installed. An access utility easement is sited along the northern property line with ingress and egress via South Hawkins Avenue. The supporting electronic equipment would be located within an equipment cabinet atop an elevated platform. The platform, which measures 8 feet by 8 feet, will be placed north of the base of the tower. A 50 feet by 50 feet compound area within the lease area would be enclosed with an 8 feet in height chain link fence with barbed wire on top. Landscaping around the entire perimeter of the lease area would consist of evergreens. Signage placed on the chain link fence would consist of 4 no trespassing signs, each measuring 12 inches by 18 inches. In addition, there will be 3 same-sized warning signs, plus an 18-inch by 36-inch contact information sign placed on the fence near the entrance gate. The site would be unmanned except for routine visits from a technician. Petitioner's site plan was reviewed at the August 6, 2019 meeting of the Urban Design and Historic Preservation Commission, UDHPC. The UDHPC recommended that the petitioner submit detailed landscaping and fencing plans in addition to tower simulation photos. In order to obtain conditional use approval, the petitioner must present sufficient evidence to satisfy the general standards applicable to all conditional uses in Section 153.474 of the codified ordinances and the special standards applicable to communication towers and facilities set forth in Section 153.476C. Under Section 153.476C9, the city may hire any consultant and or expert to the city deems necessary to assist the city in reviewing and evaluating a petition for conditional use for any proposed communication tower or facility. For this petition, the city asked its independent consultant, the Center for Municipal Solutions, to review the petitioner's proposal and conduct an investigation of the relevant facts and circumstances relating to the proposal. Here, based upon the results of the CMS investigation and the additional investigation conducted by the city's planning staff, the planning staff believes that the construction of a 120-foot tower at this specific location does not satisfy the general conditional use standards set forth in Section 153.474 which requires evidence that the use A will be harmonious with and in accordance with the general objectives of the city's comprehensive plan, and B will be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so as to be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing and intended character of the general vicinity, and will not change the essential character of the same area. I should say that the petitioner has revised the plans to construct a tower to a height of 100 feet since this had been presented to Planning Commission. One goal of the Land Use and Development Guide Plan is to promote the preservation and revitalization of viable business districts. The proposed tower location is near the middle of a dense block of retail development. Furthermore, the proposed tower is within close proximity to several long-standing neighborhood business anchors, including the House of the Lord Church and Somerville Funeral Home. The presence of such a tower would not be harmonious with the surrounding one-story businesses, and its close proximity could be damaging to abutting properties in the event of collapse, or at the very least, the perception of collapse could impede investment in the immediate area. Furthermore, the tower would be visible to residentially zoned properties to the north and west, as well as the New Seasons housing complex to the northeast. The planning staff is of the opinion, therefore, that the 100 feet in height telecommunication tower would, actually was 120 feet, now 100 feet tower would be out of character in this neighborhood and would be detrimental to the abutting uses. With respect to the height of the proposed tower, the city's independent consultant reviewed the technical information provided by the petitioner and concluded that the petitioner at the time had failed to prove the need for the proposed tower at the proposed height. Given this finding and the other facts and circumstances set forth above, the planning staff does not support the petition because the height and location of the tower will not be harmonious with and in accordance with the general objectives of the city's comprehensive plan, and will not be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing and intended character of the general vicinity, and will change the essential character of the same area. The planning staff and planning commission finds the requested conditional use is not consistent with the standards found in section 153.474A through H, and recommends disapproval of the petitioner of EcoSite LLC for a conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 1556 South Hawkins Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Antonucci. At this time, we'll open the public hearing portion and ask if there's anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the proposal at 1554 South Hawkins. If you please provide for us your name and address.
Certainly. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Don Graves. I'm an attorney with Buckley King. I am here on behalf of EcoSite and T-Mobile, which is the carrier that proposes to be located on the telecommunication tower. Also with me is Robert McAvoy, my colleague from Buckley King, Mr. Mike Gerdes, and Mr. Prakash Balakrishnan. All right. I apologize again. I have a difficult name too. Who are engineers with the T-Mobile. We have also Mr. Kit Nickel, who is the Regional Development Director for T-Mobile. We also have Mr. Mike Dobelmeyer from Fortune Wireless. Just as in the prior application, I don't know if it's easier, I'm trying to save some time. The brochures that were provided have the same application here. This is a site that's necessary to build out the network and to assure that there will be coverage necessary for the customers of T-Mobile and the citizens of Akron from now going forward. It is a capacity issue because we know that as of now we already are suffering some capacity concerns, and we know that we're going to have capacity issues based upon our computer modeling for the network. All of that was provided to Mr. Comey, at least as to why we feel we need to have it here. Again, there's only so much information that a company can provide based upon their particular unique technology and how they design their system. But we've made representation under oath that this is what is needed for our location. Again, we're including all of our application materials that have been submitted to the city through Mr. Comey and through the planning department. It's a very similar situation of, as I said, a capacity needing to be fulfilled. We believe that this site is conditionally permitted, 2 standards. Do we have a need, which we provided by our testimony, that we have a need that's essentially uncontroverted by Mr. Comey, because he acknowledges we must have a need, therefore he's proposing that we look at all these other sites. And then secondly, that there's no other existing tower. That's your code, no other existing tower. I'm going to try to merge some of the discussion just for expediency's sake, if that's permissible, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you.
The same sort of situation with delays in time, excessive fees. We've included in our packet, under Exhibit A, an example of the kind of exchanges of correspondence with Mr. Comey. Under Package B, we provided a photo simulation of the tower. Under C, again, we provide the uncontroverted testimony that there's no impact on the residential neighborhood. None. You've not heard one bit of testimony from an expert in the industry other than what we provided. D, again, it's the same galvanized steel color, which is what is required under your code. We provided some landscaping samples that can be made available depending upon what the planning department would like us to have at the particular site. We've also provided a letter under F, a commitment to allow for co-location for multiple carriers, even with the reduced proposed height. The tower is strong enough to support at least 2 other carriers, and that we'll commit to allowing for co-location for up to 3 carriers, and that we'll agree to remove it and provide the required bond under the city code. The most important document, if you don't look at anything, I ask you that you look at Section G of both documents. That's the interpretation of the Telecommunication Act as it applies to the ability of Akron to regulate these sites. That's it. It's an interpretation of the law that's been on the book. It's not a new law. It's to help communities such as yours understand when you're complying with the law and when you're not. And we respectfully submit that as applied to EcoSite and T-Mobile today, there's a large number of violations of the Telecommunications Act by the efforts to redesign. Mr. Comey purports to redesign our system by saying, can you go over here? Can you go over there? Can you go to this location? That's not the job. We've demonstrated a need that's uncontroverted by Mr. Comey, and we've shown that there's no other existing tower in the neighborhood, much less tall structure. In that, we also had looked, there's a letter from to Mr. Funk where we looked at additional locations. We proposed drawing C9 to supplement our package if it makes sense to the community. This is why we always try to meet with the various council members to see what's important. We proposed a 120-foot tower. That's our application. What we're submitting is an alternate. We've shown that we have a drawing at 100 feet. And it still will allow for multiple carriers to be located on it. It's just lower. I think that if I were to spend more time on this, I'd be rehashing the same sort of testimony that we've had before, and out of respect for everybody here, I hope you'll allow us to incorporate what was said in the prior discussion to this as it applies to the law. The bottom line is, from our perspective, we've complied with everything that's required of us under your code. We're saying to you that the kind of efforts that Mr. Comey is recommending, while may be suitable for his purposes, is not required of us under the law and absolutely prohibited by the Telecommunication Act of 1996 as further clarified by the FCC ruling. And I implore you to read that interpretation of the law. If you bear with me, because when I get out of my sequence, I have a problem. I think that's all.
Okay,
for now.
Mr. Graves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else? Anyone? Okay, very good. Anyone here wishing to speak against the proposal at 5? Certainly, I'll recognize Mr. Comey.
Right. My name is Richard Comey. I'm the owner of the Center for Municipal Solutions. My address is 70 Cambridge Drive, Glenmont, New York, 12077. This particular application, our final recommendation was that the applicant has not proven the need for a 100-foot tower at this location. We asked the applicant to provide us information as to whether or not they could go at a lower height. How do you do that? You provide the same coverage maps at a 10-foot less height, and you provide a narrative along with it, and you keep going lower until you have a problem. That was not provided. Number two, you just heard that they amended their application from 120 feet to 100 feet. What they did was they turned in a new site plan that showed that they're still going to be at the 100 feet, which is what they'd proposed all along, but that the two alternate carriers that they showed before at 110 and 120, they're now showing them at 90 and 80. Now, the first question that comes to my mind is if they think other carriers can operate at 90 and 80, why can't they? They haven't given us that information. As I stated before, folks, federal law says that once a facility is there, it can be, a tower is there, it can be increased by 10% or up to 20 feet without any proof of need whatsoever and has to be approved. So this facility that they're asking for at 100 feet, if a carrier came along and said, I don't want to go at 90, I want to go at 120, no one can challenge that because the federal law says that's as of right. I think it's important here to say that, as I specifically said, that there's no good faith effort has been shown that the facility could not be less obtrusive. The shorter the facility, the less obtrusive it is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very good. Mr. Funk?
On the map, there's a reference to fire station number 6. Can you just address that?
This is their proposed location up here. The red dot. Down here is fire station number 6. That was offered to the applicant as an alternate location, and they came back and had reasons why they did not want to further consider that location. But this was offered to them as an alternate location.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Comey. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak against this proposal? Anyone here wishing to speak against? Very good. At this time, what I'd like to do is ask... Yes, sir. With new information, Mr. Graves? Yes. New information? Okay.
Thank you very much. All I do is ask you to draw your attention to Exhibit H as to what the rationale that was used for us not being able to go to the fire station. There was a definite effort to look at the fire station, and the second page of Exhibit H specifically speaks to why that site was not good for our network. That's just the bottom line. Secondly, no, I'll let that go.
Okay.
We're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Thank you. Very good. The public hearing is closed. At this time, though, what I'd like to ask is, for the first item that we had considered, to digress and go to the one on Wilbeth, I would like to entertain a motion from someone in a second that we refer that item until next week. In essence, take time. So at this time, I'd like to know if there's a motion to refer the conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 550 East Wilbeth. Mr. Swirsky? Is there a second? Okay, very good. All those in favor of referring this item signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The ayes have it. Thank you. The next item is the one we had just had the public hearing on, and this is authorized. And again, I'd like to request that we receive refer the item till next week, and that would be authorizing conditional use to construct a telecommunications tower at 1554 South Hawkins. Is there a motion? All those in favor?
Who moved? Okay.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Abstain? Very good. Okay, very good. With that, I would, Mr. Funk? I'm sorry?
Explain for the benefit of the applicant that referring doesn't mean there could be another.
No, we're just tabling it till next week. That's what that is. Referring the item. Yes, the 7 o'clock evening meeting. So, Mr. Hoke has a question, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at the listing of petitioners that are on both pieces, and what do the petitioners do? I mean, do they sign something and get paid for having this in, being a petitioner, or I know it's all people that are surrounding there and everything, and so what are the petitioners? Are the petitioners saying that they agree to this, or what are the petitioners, and what do they get paid for this, or do they just sign a paper like a waiver, or
petitioners?
What are they?
That's a good question. Is there someone here that can answer this question? I'm not sure if I understand it. The petitioners usually...
There's a bunch of addresses here and different people.
Those are the folks that were notified, correct? Or was that the notification that was attached? I see your question now.
Is that just notification?
Mr. Antonucci, was these the people who were notified of the public hearing? That might be it.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah, so you have the mailing list that was notified.
Yeah,
that was a notification that went out.
Okay, that's just a notification. Okay, I just wondered what all those were, or why they were listed on there, and okay.
So anytime there's a conditional use application, notice goes out to anybody that lives in that general area within a certain feet of the property.
Okay. An occupant, if it just says occupant, we don't know who's there, or...
Yeah, it was notification for the public hearing.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Sure. Any further questions or comments? Okay, very good. I'd like to entertain a motion that we step out of committee as a whole. Is there a motion?
Motion to end committee as a whole proceedings.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of stepping out of the committee as a whole signify by saying aye. Those against? Very good. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.